Ron, I can see you up online.
Yes, I'm just unmuting myself.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Committee, for the opportunity to speak. Firstly, I'd just like to say that I am in principle in favour of the bill that seeks to resolve New Zealand regulations that routinely violate basic democratic governance principles. This bill, in my estimation, could accomplish some of this through its set of general legislative principles, which seem reasonable, although quite limited. The requirement for responsible agencies to proactively engage in stewardship of regulations is useful. The requirement for regular reviews by agencies against principles via consistency accountability statements. The indicated regulatory standards board's ability to conduct inquiries into inconsistencies with standards is useful, although apparently missing more general reviews of agency stewardship. And the regulatory standards board's ability to ensure government agencies meet their regulatory standard reporting obligations is useful, particularly with ultimate redress to High Court. Having indicated those positives, my disappointment in this bill are threefold. Firstly, around enforcement. So although the bill provides extensive powers to request information, there are no specific remedies that I could see where legislation that falls below the standards. For example, perhaps a requirement for ministers and indeed responsible agencies to table remedial action plans within specified timeframes. Otherwise, this could end up becoming a framework with potentially costly box-ticking process requirements, but no meaningful consequences for poor compliance. The second disappointment is really about guidance. The guidance in the bill itself is very limited, with no specific tests against standards or corresponding examples. Definitions are sparse, with many key terms or phrases undefined: unduly diminish, good justification, fair compensation, proper relation, levy is reasonable, reasonably practicable with respect to consulting. However, I noted that legislation should preserve the court's constitutional role of ascertaining the meaning of legislation. So perhaps this is an excuse for missing definitions and examples. I'd question this. Surely good governance should avoid leaving broad scope for judicial interpretation of regulations contrary to Parliament's intent. Indeed, this is, in my view, has to be an important candidate for a key principle of regulation. Apart from clear definitions, I would like to have seen much better guidance to avoid misinterpretation, even perhaps avoiding the various current conspiracy theories about nefarious intent of the bill. Guidance possibly by including worked examples or use case scenarios. Thirdly, exemptions. Regulatory exemptions, it seems to me, are often leverage for political convenience. This bill could have been an opportunity to lay down a principle to reduce or avoid such poor governance behaviours. Instead, in my view, the bill itself is guilty of including exceptions that effectively violate its own principles, for example, by not stating the cost benefit or other reasons for an exception. So I'd recommend the principle that regulatory exceptions should not be used as a method of avoiding compliance with regulatory principles or similar. So in summary, generally, I'd expect a regulatory standards bill to itself be a very model of good regulation, which in my view, the bill in its current form isn't. It requires more teeth, much more comprehensive guidance and definitions, preferably with examples to avoid misinterpretation outside of Parliament's intent, and exclusion of exclusions other than for, say, circularity reasons. However, such a bill is needed because New Zealand's legislative process does not consistently follow basic good regulatory governance principles, in my view.
Ron,
such as those expressed in the bill.
We've gone slightly over, but Mark Cameron does have a question. Is there if we take a question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you both, Mr. Chair and Ron. Thank you very much. Very good to see you both here online. Ron, you spoke about misinterpretation of the law given the judicial branch, less so the Crown and its role as the sovereign power, you might say, of New Zealand. Can you give us some examples where you've seen misinterpretation from the Crown via the courts in New Zealand and where that's played out?
I think, yeah, I mean, some of that is, from what I've seen, is a lot of what's been talked about today, and that's on the treaty itself. So when I look at what is a very simple document signed in 1840, what's often talked about in the courts and indeed by government is features that are such as active protection. That's one example. That's not in the treaty, yet it's talked about as though it is in the treaty, both by government and particularly by the courts. So that's one example. I think it would be more honest to say that active protection is a policy. It's not in the treaty, but it's decided more recently that it's going to be a policy.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very good answer. Very grateful for your answer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. Thank you, Ron.
I don't know what to say on that one.
Yeah, where should we start? I mean, the man's
feels
talking
all
about good
wishy-washy
governance.
all over the place.
I don't know.
I couldn't give a weird it didn't feel like it had any pillars of structure where it is. Like I understand the foundation what he's saying. I don't know exactly how he's got to that foundation, but I understand he thinks that the regulation system in New Zealand is shite. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like... It feels very vibey, not much substance to it.
Yeah, I mean, the man's talking about like focusing on principles of good governance and good regulation, but then he mentioned the Regulatory Standards Board, which is something that's completely outside of government,
Yeah.
and would be appointed by the minister, and that is just totally outside of good governance. I mean, that's like essentially appointing a bunch of your mates to sit on a board to then, approve legislation that comes out of the parliament, and then it just becomes a crony show,
Yeah.
And how does that become good governance?
It doesn't.
Well, no, it doesn't. That's right. It's just ridiculous.
We've looked at appetite of it, whether there is or isn't, but Wellington Water has sparked favouritism in there with the fact that Ross Leggett is a sitting councillor on Porora City Council, and his son Nick Leggett is on the board of Wellington Water, and that has shown that now whether that is or isn't favoritism in there, but that particular example does have the appearance of it.
Yeah.
I think the word the appearance doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily mean whether Nick's a good or a bad governor. And I mean, who said Ross didn't sit there and abstain from voting? That part is unknown. It probably is somewhere in council records, and we can probably give two people on the Porora City Council to find out. But it's not worth finding out tonight.
No. Let's not
I
make
don't
phone
think Jeff or
tonight.
Josh would sit there and appreciate a phone call on that one.
Probably not.
Yeah, because especially at live and near. We're not going to do a Sean Plankin on them. Yeah. Okay.